I genuinely cannot believe that we are finally at this point. We can officially say that the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is real, and it is not the absolute worst thing that I saw. I know it sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I really want to get into this because there's so much to cover that I'm not going to be able to get everything done. Now, I did see this movie on the opening weekend, and it was a really solid cinema experience, so if you are seeing this as a FNAF fan, although you've more than likely already seen it over the weekend, I do think that the cinema experience I had really elevated my experience with the film. Unlike some other viewing experiences I had, such as Avengers Endgame, where we just had some of the most annoying people imaginable, well, there was definitely some annoying people in my viewing. For the most part, everyone was on board and everyone was enjoying the film and laughing along with it. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But first of all, what do I think of the first Five Nights at Freddy's movie? It is a movie that is really good if you are a FNAF fan. I think that for the most part, this film does a really good job of bridging the gap between die-hard fans and more the casual goer or who has comings and goings and knowledge of Five Nights at Freddy's. It's not a necessity in order to understand what's going on, because I do think the film does a pretty good job of conveying its plot and its story, considering that it's one of the strongest elements the film has for itself. I do think it managed to toe the line between a mystery where you want to solve everything that's going on, while of course not leaving it so open-ended that you need like the extended MatPat cinematic universe in order to understand it, which is, a great thing for the casual goer. The YouTuber and other fandom appearances and references are still very much there, and one of the other things, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is the sense of humour the film has. It is actually really quite funny. A lot of Scott's sense of humour is still very strong in this film, and I really do appreciate that, because that's a good part of what made FNAF a very special franchise in the first place. The characters and the characterizations, I think, was also a really solid point throughout the film. I think especially for Mike and Abby, considering they are the central characters for the majority of the movie, their connections was done very well. I do like the fact that Mike is still kind of hanging around in the past for a traumatic event, which is only kind of extended when he's actually at Freddy's, hence why he keeps coming back to this dead-end job, as well as the environments of the film portraying how really rough and difficult things are. And I think this basically goes without saying as well, but the animatronic designs are absolutely perfect. They literally look like they came directly out of the video game, although I will of course engage in the discourse that Bonnie was always purple, he was not blue. You may have just messed up the order to Jim Henson's Creature Productions or whatever it's called. You still did an absolutely fantastic job on all of the designs, however. And there are of course some actual restrictions because these characters are so designed very much in line with the game, and the character that is the most obviously affected is Foxy, because Foxy is a very slim, very lightweight in terms of design, because of course it explains the fact, he's able to move really quickly, he runs down the hallway. Now while there is of course a motion kind of jump scare from Foxy as we saw in some of the trailers, it's not something that's very consistent, and Foxy isn't really seen running around the place, probably because it took like 9 fucking puppeteers to keep him up, which is an insane feat, and of course something that we had to just accept. The restaurant itself as well looks really good. I love the new aesthetic that they've gone for this Five Nights restaurant, and as well I think that some of the other elements were kind of weaker, things like parts and service and the closet, but they actually make up for it in the extended kill count. I don't want to go too much into it because it is very spoiler heavy, but I do think that they do a little bit more justification as to why they would be in the restaurant in the first place for them to be murdered. And while I'm also on this point, I want to refer to something that a lot of critics were saying, that this film was apparently bloodless, which absolutely not. The final death, while of course nowhere near as gory as what it could have been, is still very much a bloody affair, as well as one of the other characters in the middle point of the film also meeting a suitably violent end. But while I'm on this point as well, I'm going to refer to something that is probably the biggest flaw that the entire movie has, and is the bit that I find is the most jarring for me. I'm at two ends on this. This film is not scary, like at all. There is really very little bits, I would say, that actually made me scared or unsettled in any way. The music was really good, and that really helped build the atmosphere, but not by a huge amount, and there's a huge gamble that the film takes in the middle portion of the film that I don't really think pays off. If you've seen it, you're probably already aware of what I mean, but if you're like a horror buff, you want something gory, you want something violent, and more likely scary, this is not the film for you. I think if you're a FNAF fan, you're kind of in that in-between point. I like to view FNAF as like a springboard into other horror genres and other horror franchises, but the Five Nights movie is really playing it quite safe in my opinion. Even there's not that many jump scares in the film. There are some funny ones because, you know, Scott's sense of humour, but this film really was not that scary. As I mentioned, there was a bit that they tried to build up for the latter half, which it kind of works, but not really. And I do think that if you are going into this for expectations of it being a scary movie, that's not going to really be what pans out. But that also adds to another point. This is a horror film that's not very scary, so it kind of fails on that front, which is a bad thing. But I can't bring myself to hate this movie, and it's not just because, oh, you're nostalgic for Five Nights at Freddy's. I've distanced myself from parts of the franchise for a very long time, and even the fandom. But I still found this film to be an enjoyable experience. It kind of, in a way, brought an end to that if you were moving on from FNAF, which I think a lot of people probably would also be considering at this point. If they do make more movies, of course I will watch them. But one of the things I found which was a very special moment was that towards the end of the film, actually no, at the credits of the film now, the Living Tombstone song is played. The original song that kickstarted this entire fandom. I'm not saying it was all on him, but that's the one that pretty much everyone knows as one of the first Five Nights at Freddy's songs. It's a very special film for the fandom and fans. And that, I think, is the key point. I don't even view this as a video game movie. This is like a fandom movie. But at the end of the day, I think for horror buffs and horror fans around the world, it's not going to be something for everyone. But I hope that it could be used for something to maybe introduce people into the horror genre. It's not as unapproachable as I first thought it was made to be. But before we go into another debate, and there's another debate on top of this as well, such as how violence and horror should be used in FNAF, which I'll probably be doing at a later date. Don't hold me to that, but I really do want to do that one at some point. And so that kind of brings me to the end. There's a lot of other little nitpicks here and there. The Toreador March, the iconic song from Freddy, wasn't used in there, but Foxy does have a new Pirate Cove song, which I will accept. There's also not very huge amounts of William Afton in this film, despite the fact that when he is on screen, he is absolutely fantastic. He is great to see. And there's also some other bits like Golden Freddy was in the film, but he was barely distinguishable from Freddy, which...
Okay. Now you die.
But he also wasn't in the film that much. He was only in for, I think, 1 or 2 scenes. And that's about it, which is really disappointing considering how important of a character he is in the lore. But, you know, again, this film is going for a whole new lore, so we don't exactly know where that could go. But I also like to say this film is very self-contained. There's no big stinger segment at the end. There is one post-credit scene, but it is a very funny one, and I do appreciate it. As I said, the cinematography as well throughout this film was really strong, but at the same time, I don't think there's a huge amount to save this film for the majority of people who aren't into Five Nights at Freddy's. So, if I was to give this film a score, I think at most I would have to be able to give it as a 7. Maybe even an 8 because I am that much of a fan, but I do understand why so many other horror film buffs are just really not liking this movie. But as a fan of the franchise, it has a very special place in my heart, and I'm really glad I got to see it in the way that I did with my friends. So if you are going to see this film and you've not seen it yet, I do recommend the cinema experience, but that might have been because we did see it on the opening weekend. But either way, that's my opinions on the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Do let me know what you thought about it down below. Maybe I'll do a spoiler review if you're interested in that. I will probably rewatch the film again through Peacock because my time is very limited these days, as well as apparent because I'm how barren this channel really is. But there is more stuff coming hopefully in the future. So thank you again so much for watching, and if you did enjoy, do support the channel down below. Thank you so much. Goodbye.